and welcome to this special edition of Indianomics Breaking Bad Debt. In a landmark move to tackle the recurring menace of bad loans, the President of India has signed off on the ordinance to tweak the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The fine print of the changes comes with a big twist. It's not just willful defaulters and those convicted of fraud. Defaulting promoters in general are set to lose their companies. So this basically means that the Ruiyas of the SR Group, the Singles of the Bhushan Group, Manoj Gaur of JP and many others could see their companies snatched away from them. The law does not mince its words or beat around the bush. It reads, and I quote, "In order to strengthen further the insolvency resolution process, it has been considered necessary to provide for prohibition of certain persons from submitting a resolution plan who, on account of their antecedents, may adversely impact the credibility of the process under the code." End of quote. So the writing is pretty much on the wall and in the statute book. It is the end of the road for errant and defaulting promoters. Joining us to discuss how this will play out in the banking system, in the ecosystem, in corporate India and in the courtrooms are Mr. P Pradeep Kumar, former Managing Director of State Bank of India, Sandeep Parekh, founder of Finsec Law Advisors, and Abizer Diwanji, partner at EY. Also joining us in a bit will be the man who was instrumental at several stages in drafting these laws, Bahram, Vakil, eminent lawyer of AZB. Shardul, Shroff, another eminent lawyer, will also be joining us in a bit later on in the show. Gentlemen, welcome. Before we begin, I earlier spoke with two chairmen of big banks, former chairmen and also former deputy governors of the Reserve Bank of India, S.S. Mundra and K.C. Chakraborty, on the significance and impact of these changes. Hear them out.
We need to distinguish between the outstanding amount and overdue amount.
Oh.
Right. Yeah, when we are talking about the entire amount, it is the outstanding amount, not the entire amount is overdue. But then there are technicalities, and those would need a clarification, because technically, the way banks execute the documents, if there is a default in paying an installment or a cross default, technically they can say that the entire amount becomes callable, and in that case it is overdue.
I think it is quite reasonable. Promoter can participate, provided he can make the account first standard. If you look, overdue means after restructure the overdue amount or before restructure overdue amount, because you see, as per the new definition. So that needs to be clarified. Reserve Bank has to clarify it. But all of what I'm saying, that I don't agree that entire amount has to be paid back. It is only the overdue portion that has to be paid back, which the banks feel or Reserve Bank criteria wise the account becomes standard.
Well, those were the two former deputy governors and former chairmen of banks themselves saying that a promoter can apply for his own company provided he clears all overdues as well as interest and charges due on his account before he participates in the resolution plan. Well, Mr. Pradeep Kumar, that question to you. Do you think this weakens the bankers somewhat because this makes it too difficult for the promoter to participate?
I think it effectively rules out any promoter to participate as long as the account is an NPA for more than 12 months. That's what it says.
Yes.
And obviously, all the 12 cases that have been referred to the NCLT have been classified, I think, as NPA for more than 12 months.
Yes.
So at least in these 12 cases, it is crystal clear the promoters cannot participate because obviously all the accounts are overdue and they have been classified as NPA.
Well, actually, the law goes further, sir, as we get to an insertion in section 35, it says that even while liquidating the asset, the liquidator shall not sell the movable and immovable property to those who are barred from participating in the resolution. Does this, is this draconian, or do you think even this is welcome?
I mean, it is very difficult to say, but it ensures that the market is at the time of liquidation becomes slightly restricted. But I think it is fair that the same promoter should not buy the asset at the liquidated prices. That is also, I think, fair. I think it's slightly drastic step, but I think a welcome step considering the present conditions we are in, the difficulties we are in, and I think the dilemma of the government should be that
Okay.
The promoter who has defaulted should not be able to get back.
Okay.
Maybe slightly draconian, because in some cases at least, I'm not referring to any specific case, default could have happened beyond the control of the promoter. Promoter would have I know some cases when I was working in the bank, there are things that the promoter had done everything that he could do, but there are circumstances beyond his control.
Yes.
In such cases, it appears very drastic.
Yes, I mean, at a time when, even steel prices swing from, under $250 all the way to perhaps $500 all in a year, and there are countries actively trying to dump steel or tires or rubber, there can be forces beyond the control. But let me leave it to the lawyer to say that. Sandeep Parekh, if you looked at all the categories that have been kept out as ineligible to apply for the resolution plan, do you think this can get challenged?
I would expect it to get challenged because, the stakes are large. So, even if it's a 1% chance, I mean, that's the way the Indian litigation system works. If the benefit is large enough, you take that 1% chance to litigate that and file a writ in the High Court or the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And since many of these cases are very, very time bound, 6 months, 9 months, I would expect to see some challenges.
Okay. Well, Sandeep, in that case, so far, neither the Supreme Court, nor the High Court, nor the NCLT have stayed the process. They have allowed the process to continue and heard the case. Will that be the case even now, that even if there are challenges, the NCLT process will continue?
No, so see, the ground rules have changed now. As of today, it says the ordinance is in effect from as soon as it's notified and signed by the president. So it is probably in effect already. Given that once the ground rules have changed, the promoters who were eligible yesterday are not eligible tomorrow. So they will have to kind of, if they put in the bids, they'll have to, if they fall into any of these categories, or if they're part of the consortium, because it talks of persons acting in concert.
Yeah.
So even if they're one of the 10 people who are part of the
my
revival
question
process,
is that if it is challenged, Sandeep,
so I think
will the process be compromised?
No, so challenge itself does not compromise the process, but if there is a stay, certainly it will mess up the whole system, because a large number of people, again, I'm not talking about 12 or 11 specific cases, because I believe that most of them are not going to be impacted. But I'm talking broadly about the qualitative principle that if you fall into any of these categories and you're debarred from participating, then I think where you were eligible yesterday, you won't be eligible tomorrow. So I think that will change the comparative landscape, the entire regulatory landscape.
Okay. Well, Abizer, now let's get to the commercial angle. Does this reduce the chances of the banks getting a good price because the number of competitors may decrease?
No, absolutely. I think it's not only about the number of competitors, Lata. It's also about the quantum of the bids. And let me explain to you. From whatever we have seen until now, not a lot of people are actually calculating sustainable debt based on an EBITDA churn. So normally a 4 times EBITDA churn is what one would value companies at. But where we have seen people talk about bidding for debt, sustainable debt numbers, there have been a multiple of that number. Okay. And the reason is that they were expecting until now that the promoter will come up and bid a higher amount, and they will have to try and match that amount. And what we are now going to see is not only will the promoter not be part of the bid process, but effectively the optimism in the bids will come down, and that would actually result in lesser sustainable debt being bid for anyway. So that may impact the banking sector not only because of competitors being less, but also because of the fact that the overall value of sustainable debt as perceived would come down.
Okay. But you obviously expect this to be taken to court?
Yeah, absolutely. As Sandeep said, there will be litigation. I think there was, to be very fair, whether this regulation came or didn't come, whoever would not have been, who would not have won the bid or would have been disqualified would have anyway gone in for litigation. So I think litigation is something which would be part of it, and the first round of NCLT cases would see that level of litigation. So we will see litigation for sure.
But Abizer, it has a huge deterrent impact, doesn't it, for the future of the corporate system and the banking system. Will you get something by way of deterrence and good corporate behavior, and therefore the loss in terms of returns to the banking system from the current cases is compensated?
Yeah, I think so, because look at the current cases. These are large mega plants being run by people. Now, either they get taken over by another set of promoters who, frankly, may behave no differently going forward, but all the same, they are clean and they meet all the criteria. They'll be either they get taken over by another set of promoters, or a new management team comes in, gets financed by somebody else. Now, frankly, the latter is a less of a choice given the Indian environment, and frankly, we are a promoter-dominated economy for a reason. So, frankly, in my view, this is one, not going to be very fair on most people. Secondly, I don't see this as a legislation which exists anywhere else in the world. So everywhere else in the world, everybody is allowed to bid, but a good criteria is set to whom to accept and whom not to accept. So, for example, if somebody who does not have a good
Abizer,
track record,
promoters can bid over here. Promoters can bid if they pay the overdues.
Yeah, of course. But by the way, they are in NCLT because they could not pay the overdues. So, in a way, if somebody came and said, I mean, now that's an interesting aspect to look at, the overdue aspect. If somebody came and said that I am going to part finance a repayment, so out of the total debt of say 100, if 50 is sustainable, I'm willing to put 25 on the table today. Will that 25 be attributable towards settling of the overdues, or will the overdues have to be settled before they even bid? That's a question that maybe needs to be answered.
Okay, Mr. Pradeep Kumar, how do you think it will be interpreted?
I mean, if you see the letter of the law, I think the day they put in the bid, there should not be any overdues. If there is no overdues, the account would not have been NCLT, as Abizer said.
Okay.
So I think it effectively shuts off the promoter. The question whether it is fair or drastic, that's a different issue. But I think as the law reads now, I don't think the current set of promoters can, most promoters will be taken, most companies will be taken to NCLT. I don't think the promoters will be eligible.
Oh. But Mr. Pradeep Kumar, is it not possible that in some cases the covenants are so written that if you go overdue beyond a particular point, then you will have to pay the entire amount? If that is the case, then there may not be even a difference between outstanding amount and overdue amount, which Mr. Mundra was making.
I agree, because I think most covenants say that beyond a certain point, the entire amount becomes overdue. Okay. That's how I think normally the loan agreements are written.
Okay.
And I would not be able to comment on specific cases because I wouldn't know, but that is generally the way it is written.
Okay. In that case, outstanding amounts, of course, are too large to expect the promoter to pay, right?
But Lata, you see, these cases have gone to NCLT primarily because the promoters have not been able to pay even the overdue.
Okay. Well,
forget the entire amount.
Fair point, sir. One quick last question to you, Sandeep. Do you think, this goes to those who have been banned to becoming directors? It also extends to relatives of the promoters, associates, subsidiaries. It extends to a whole lot of people. I mean, there are 7-8 categories of people who are banned. Do you think this is too sweeping, and therefore in some of these smaller cases, the courts will have to intervene and knock off?
No, I don't think so. I think broadly there's categorizing all kinds of people. I think the only category which there is a little bit of chance of a judicial review would be default, which has lasted for more than a year.
Okay.
So I think there, as opposed to mischief, as opposed to fraud, as opposed to a personal guarantee, any of those things, I think we kind of distinguishing failure from mischief in all the other categories except for this one. So I think there is some chance that that particular provision where they say that default of more than 1 year will, categorizes somebody who's not competent to bid in this. I think that's the only one which I feel is slightly weak. Okay. I think all the others are, and again, you have to look at it don't look at it from a very practical perspective.
That's a crucial one, Sandeep. That is the one. That's a crucial one
because kind of an ethical question.
See, it is that 1 year which actually bars the promoters. So if you think that is a weak one, and the promoters will question why 1 year, why not 2 years, or some such ground, you know, that is the big one which keeps the promoters out. You think that's the vulnerable one?
Yes, I think it's not a question of 1 year, but whether failure should be penalized at all. So whether it's even if it's a month or for 10 years, the issue is whether somebody who's genuinely failed and who's tried to kind of catch up and not been able to repay the loans, whether that person, and I think as I said, you know, it's not a very practical issue. It's an ethical issue. Okay. Whether a person who's kind of done mischief, who's committed fraud, who's given guarantees and defaulted, whether those kind of people, and it kind of goes back to what, you know, Einstein said, that, you know, it's madness is trying to do the same thing and expecting different results. Oh, right. So I mean, there's a lot of merit to debarring many of them, but maybe not all of them. All right, fair point. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts. But we're going to have more legal experts and corporate and banking experts joining us to discuss how effective this law is and whether this is a clean break with the past and is a new page in Indian corporate and banking history. We're back in a minute.